Hello and welcome to The Art of Aging, which is part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from United Church Homes. On this show, we look at what it means to age in America and in other places around the world with positive and empowering conversations that challenge, encourage, and inspire everyone, everywhere to age with abundance. Today, I am so pleased to have Tina Sandri on the show with us. Tina is currently the Chief Executive Officer for Forest Hills of DC, which is a multi-site community offering a continuum of senior living services in our nation's capital, that's Washington, D.C. for our listeners, including assisted living, memory care, long and short stay, skilled care, respite, and hospice care. And this is a role that she jumped into right during COVID in May of 2020. And we're going to talk about that. Tina is an amazing leader. She integrates the values of compassion, respect, integrity, inclusion, growth mindset, and sustainability into her teams and the organization that she serves. She has over 30 years of professional experience as a licensed nursing home administrator and has successfully worked in CCRCs as continuing care retirement communities, assisted living nursing home, and memory care environments with both for-profit and nonprofit organizations. List of accolades as long as your arm, most notably including the McKnight's Women of Distinction Award for 2023. So not an easy thing to get. So congratulations, Tina. And on top of this, she is just such a strong believer in just holistic care, holistic models of health. She's a certified yoga instructor and has so many other things that she does in her life really to support the idea of positive aging. So happy we grabbed you for the show. You're very busy. Tina, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're too kind. Thank you.
Thank you. And the topic of this podcast, I'm going to call it Building Trust with Your Workforce at Times of Change. And, in thinking about this and unpacking the subject, I couldn't think of anyone better to interview than you, Tina, because you have just got such a great kind of case study, in effect, of really building trust with workforce at an extremely challenging time for our industry, which is during the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic impacted everyone, but we just got broadsided with it in senior living. So we're going to talk about that, but I want to kind of open up with a question that I ask a lot of our guests is that, you've done a lot in your professional life, but you're choosing this area of service. You're choosing this career. What drives your passion for senior living and aging services?
Thank you for that question, Mike. I am Chinese, and so one of the core values that I was raised with was care for the elders. And I explain this to people who live in America. I was born and raised in America, so I am American, but I'm also the child of Chinese immigrants. And I think if we talk about the value of freedom in America, it is a value that regardless of your diversity, where you come from, where you live, it's a value that we as Americans can gather around and have a common belief that freedom is important. It's part of our national fabric of who we are. Freedom to choose, the freedom to love, the freedom to work, all those types of things, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And I think if you were to take that sentiment and look at what is sort of the apex value in China, it would be respect for elders. And so that's the way I was raised. And originally, my dad wanted me to be a doctor, and I didn't really want to be a doctor. So the great compromise was go to your parents, but you can kind of tweak it a little. So I said, okay, I will go into healthcare, but I really was more interested in the business management, leadership side than the clinical side. So that's kind of how I found my path in high school. And I'm one of the few people that decided intentionally, without a pre-exposed background, that in high school I decided this is what I wanted to do for my career, and it's what I've pursued the whole time.
Tell us about where you work today. What is Forest Hills of DC?
Forest Hills of DC is a 134-year-old organization. We're a nonprofit located in the nation's capital, and we have a long-standing contiguous history of serving our elders in the city. So we provide skilled services, assisted living, secured assisted living, memory care services, hospice services, respite services, short-term rehab services. So essentially, it's the CCRC continuum with the memory care component minus the IL. And so what we have is sort of like the healthcare side continuum across. And I'm very happy to have this service level here. And it's, I think one of the things that makes us unique here in DC, aside from our 134-year-old contiguous mission and our 5-star status, we're also silver awarded the Aldrich Quality Awards. But really, what I hear that makes us what we are and why our residents choose us is because we have a home-like, very home-like feeling. So we're not a hotel. We don't get the hotel feeling. We're not a club feeling. We are very home-like. Is people choose us for that reason. Our building that we're in right now, we've only been here 98 years. We were at some other campuses prior to that, but we've been on this campus for 98 years. So like some old bodies, this building also has its quirks because it is 98 years old, but it also has the charm of an old house as well.
I love that. I love that. And also kudos to you for the attaining the 5-star rating, the Silver Baldrige Award status. I mean, DC is a tough place to operate a licensed care facility, right?
It is a tough place. There's about 18 nursing homes, and so we have a very our survey team have plenty of time to come around and visit us compared to other states where you might have 1,500 or more nursing homes. So it is a much smaller community. Everybody knows everybody, and again, double-edged sword. But it also does have a very, in a professional sense, a sense of community because we are small, because we don't have representation on the Hill. One of the things that makes us unique is that we have to self-advocate for our needs. We don't have a congressman to go to say, we need you to the Hill to get this change for us. So we work directly within our association collaboration in DC to go to the Medicaid office, to DC government, to look at Department of Health issues. Don't have an intermediary per se. So it does require just to have a little bit more direct dialogue and cohesion and a sense of community between the providers.
Yeah,
Being on an
yeah,
island in some way, you have to band together.
But you're always on your toes, right? And that's what you've got auditors that could probably come by more frequently. The standards are tough. I mean, it's you can't slack, can you?
No, but I would say nobody can slap right, within the senior living industry. It's a tough place to be from a regulatory compliance standpoint, and your listeners are going to be aware of that as well. I think what makes DC a little more unique is because it is a high cost area, the nation's capital. One of our challenges is that our workforce generally can't afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Washington, DC. And so most of our workforce commutes in from outside of DC, which provides a whole different set of challenges outside of this context. But for example, there are grant funds that support workforce initiatives in DC, but if they're not a DC resident, they don't apply. So most of our workforce can't get to those kinds of funds. And then the cross-jurisdiction issues being a small place, if something's happening in Maryland or Virginia, it's going to impact our workforce as well. In terms of competition. So we're not just competing with Starbucks and hotels, we're also competing with Maryland, which is, 4 miles away from us. So it's an interesting dynamic.
And workforce is just the lifeblood of everything. I mean, nothing works unless you have workforce. And, this is what we're talking about today, building trust with your workforce and building trust with your workforce during times of change. And here you are. You chose to become the CEO of Forest Hills in May of 2020, knowing full well that COVID was in full swing. And I would say that you managed through this far better than others in your space. And I've got to tell our audience that this is something Tina and her team have received international coverage and recognition for. You're too modest to say this, but I'll say, you were a New York Times cover article. You were interviewed by the BBC. Were you surprised by the attention that you got?
Yeah, it was definitely surprising in the beginning to get the attention. It started because a journalist from the New York Times was looking to do coverage. As you know, the index patient for COVID in America came out of a nursing home on West Coast. And so nursing homes were getting a lot of negative press, to be honest, in the beginning with regards to COVID and what was happening in there, killing people. So forth. And I know that we run a top-notch program. I'm very proud of what we do. One of our principal values here is integrity. It's doing the right thing when no one's looking. And I have belief that our team is doing well. So when we got asked if we would showcase what we were doing and give the New York Times access, we were the first nursing home in America to give the New York Times access to our community over a 3-month window. So they wanted to come and look at our vaccine clinics, talk to our employees, talk to people who were vaccine hesitant, talk to people who did get the vaccine to understand why. And at that time, there was a lot of fear, a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of lack of knowledge, a lack of trust. And so we thought about it and we said, sure, you can come and take a look at what we were doing. And over that 3-month window, because we were the first to give them that kind of access, they kind of learned about our community, our philosophies, what we were doing to work with our employees over that time period. And we shared some of our practices, which then became in part this article that was on the New York Times. And then I got a call from CNN wanting to understand what was in the article. And from there, it just sort of mushroomed. We had the opportunity to educate the United States Chamber of Commerce, of which Google and Yahoo and those other types of businesses belong to, on how to work with your workforce to get them, to encourage them to get the COVID vaccine. So it was definitely a mushrooming opportunity. And our mission here is to create a supportive community that inspires and engages seniors and their caregivers. And so for us, the idea where we could be an inspiration to others to practice COVID safety, to get to those numbers with their workforce, was in part fulfillment of our mission, and to care for their caregivers. So it was consistent with who we are as a nonprofit.
Yeah, and I mean, I know you did remarkable stuff, during the initial vaccination period, and we'll talk about that. But going back to when you first landed at Forest Hills, you've taken the job, you've accepted. Here I am, the brand new CEO of Forest Hills. It's May of 2020, and the staff have gone through 2 months of craziness, or even more up to that point. How do you start off on the right foot in that situation? What do you think that you did? Or what did you intend to do as you started to kind of build that trust and be that leader?
Well, for us, it was very different because everything was on lockdown. You couldn't really, it was don't go around to places you shouldn't be in, minimize exposure and contacts. And so typical rounding wasn't happening as much in that scenario. And when we talk about the COVID situation as a case study for us, I arrived in May and we had vaccines by the end of the year, around the last week of December. And so for us, leading up to that vaccine window, we did about 8 weeks of communications with our team. We knew the vaccine was being developed. We knew it was coming. I'd be honest, I was the first one to say, let's mandate it because we already mandate flu. Let's just add it to the mandatory list. And the department heads and our administrator were saying, no, that's not going to work. People just won't go with it. And for all the reasons that we already talked about, why they wouldn't go with it. So we regrouped, listening to our department heads. I said, okay, well, where do we start from? And so we looked at our values, and looking at our values of respect and compassion for the fear, compassion for the overworked status, compassion for the mistrust. And it's when you feel and you empathize with someone is feeling, and then you're moved to take action to somehow alleviate that stressor. We decided, okay, if they're coming from this space, how can we alleviate their fears? Mm-hmm. And also a core belief in working in senior living I've always had is that our staff are pretty smart. And most people are trying to do the best thing in the best way that they figured it out with the knowledge they have at the time. And I believe that to be the case with most humans in most industries, are trying to do the best job they can the way they got it figured out today. So we figured our workforce hadn't figured out the vaccines because really they're focused on resident care. They weren't spending their time doing the research and the studies. So we created basically an 8-week outreach program to communicate. And my background's also in communication. So looking at what did we need to teach about? Things like, what is mRNA? that a fake vaccine because it is a mimicking of a traditional vaccine? So people didn't understand, is that fake? Is it plastic? Is it what's going in there? Then they wanted to know how it was invented, who invented it, when, who was profiting from this invention, whose pockets were they lining, what was inside the vaccine, what are the components of the vaccine? Is it stuff I've already had in my body? Is this new stuff? Is it coming from, is it manufactured? Is it out of nature? And then there was a real lack also of understanding what are side effects versus immune response. Immune response being something typical that you would expect, like the fever and the sore arm. But and that would be a good sign that your body's furnace was turning on to cook away the germs, right? But side effects, which then become, warning labels on drugs, that's a different ballgame. And so we needed to educate our workforce on all these different components. There were more. I'm just giving you some examples, but to kind of think about what were the concerns and questions that people had about the vaccine itself became the subject of what we wanted to educate. And then we realized that we wanted to catch people in their best and strongest learning method. We have some people that are auditory learners and listeners. We have folks that are listening to this podcast. Other people might prefer to read books about the topic. We have visual learners, and then you have the tactile learners who have to experience it, right? So you can tell me how to get from here to the corner drugstore down the street. You can show me on a map, or you can walk with me, right? So we all learn in different ways. And so we catered the answers to the questions that I just told you in terms of different learning methods. And then we also did something that I would say, I like to call it 8 ways. What are the 8 ways that you communicate? And when we push out content to folks, there's lots of different examples. So you can do an email, you can do a text, you can do posters or flyers, you can do huddles and stand-ups, you can do one-to-ones, you can do videos, you can do photos, right? Pictures worth 1,000 words. That's what a mural is on the street. You can do return demonstration. And now we have social media as another outlet for communications, right? Phone calls, robocalls, live calls. So there's lots of different ways. And I always tell our teams that if there's something important that you want to get across, don't think because you sent an email with a return receipt, it means that it went out and people digested it. Not, certain generations are on email, some are on their phones, some aren't on either. And then you've got to catch them in person. So we felt that these communications could be repeated out in different ways. Then you have people's decision making and how they take the data that you give them and how they value sort that information. So if you're saying, hey, we want you to take the COVID vaccine, you have people that are relational. I took the COVID vaccine because my mom was a transplant patient. She's immune compromised for the rest of her life, and so I want to protect her. That would be a relational choice that you make. Then you would have the people who are data driven, who want to know of the how many people were gotten this before me. Am I a guinea pig? And what were how many people had side effects? Right? How many people got fevers? How many people dropped dead from it? These are things that people who are data oriented wanted to know. And then you had your process thinkers. You had to get over the hurdle with them. So for a process thinker, it might look like, why did this get approved so quickly compared to other vaccines that take years to get? And we had to answer, it's because the people who wear business suits like me, who have to give their stamp of approval on each step along the way, moved a lot faster than usual. It's not because the people in lab coats cut any steps along the way. And so we had to be able to share the stories around that and the information around that, or that this was developed in part. My workforce is 95% Black and African American and Islanders. And so we had to explain, oh, did you know that one of the inventors is an African American? And so that would help us get over objections to Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks experimentation, knowing that Hopkins is just down the street from us, that history of misusing an African-American woman's cells was a very local concern. I'm sure a national as well, but particularly local because it happened that we had to overcome with our workforce as well. And so having these addressed head on, along with understanding that people want to hear from trusted resources. So we would say, here's information we're sharing with you. Take it to your church, take it to your family, take it to your friends, digest the information, think about it, come back if you have any questions. We intentionally left politics out of it. There was nothing about the president says, Democratic says, Republican says. We just left it to the scientific data and intentionally left out politics, the wider implications in the community, because what made this vaccine different was its implication on someone's life. And when you think about work issues, a lot of people handle work and then they go home and they can put on their home hat, mom, partner, whatever. And in the context of COVID, you couldn't because it affected your social life and who you could be around. Did you have a vaccine card approved so you could go to the movie theater? Are you invited to the neighborhood wedding or funeral because of your vaccine status? So there were implications outside of life, but we intentionally didn't address those. We just talked about the science of the vaccine and said, we know that you are an intelligent person and you will make the right choice for you and your family. And in the end, our workforce actually did make the right choice for themselves. And then in terms of thinking styles, the other type of thinker is your creative out of the box thinker, right? So you're one of those, Mike. You're always thinking about new ideas. And so people in those areas are looking at the vaccine, kind of looking for, mRNA, it sounds like the new sexy vaccine because it's the first time it's being launched on a big scale. And yet its development, if you're a blue process thinker, was in the makings for 20 years, right? It had been used in terms of looking at Ebola and other issues around the world. So this was the first launch for COVID, but it wasn't completely new. And also educating people that COVID, while this species of COVID was deadly and a new thing, if you went and looked at your Lysol bottle, it's not like they were all reprinted. Lysol for years has had on their bottle, it's effective against COVID. There had been other COVIDs, just not one as widespread as this one. And so it's just all those kinds of things, educating the workforce, and that what was inside the vaccine, you've already gotten into your body through living your life. You've already been exposed to all the components of it. There's nothing new in it that you're not seeing, per se. And that was the idea of one of our life enrichment aides. As he was talking to his peers, he heard that their objection was, well, I don't know what's in it. So he went and found out what was in it, and then found out where those ingredients are being used in your everyday life already. And he created these little flyers. He took them around the building and gave them to coworkers. And we saw that as an opportunity that here was a self-made champion for the cause of getting vaccines. And so we said, what can we do to support you? And we had him elevated to participate in a town hall for the Black community that included folks from the White House and other people. And he was essentially the provider's rep on this call. And this is our activities aide. And he did a wonderful, outstanding job of advocating. So it doesn't just have to come from leadership. The fact that you can recognize it in the building when you have a person with natural talent towards whatever your challenge is, that you can see and elevate that talent and give it a platform and give them the voice and the resources to have that fulfillment of work, that engagement that goes beyond the job description. So for all those reasons, we were able to think about how people learn, right? The auditory, visual, tactile learners, 8 different ways to communicate, the various different points. Like we'd spend a week on what is mRNA, and we push it out through social media. We push it out through flyers. We push it out through huddles. So we would take those 8 ways to communicate, find multiple ways to push the message of the week out into different formats. We had giant screens in the lobby that were running videos with Tyler Perry on them. We had little fortune cookie slips saying, because it was like a 20-minute video he did. And staff were coming in and out and said, here's a slip. You can watch the rest of it on your phone, or you can watch it at home. And so we would help them. I literally was helping employees pull it up on YouTube and things and get it started and saying, here, you can just press play if you want to watch it later. And that's not traditionally how we educate our workforce, but we had to find lots of different ways to do that. So in doing so, we were able to get our group towards basically herd immunity before the words mandated vaccine were even on the table nationally.
Because that's right. What you weren't, you were just in the volunteer mode right now, and the stakes are incredibly high for your business.
Mhm.
They're very, very high. So you are able to basically, with all these, I mean, I love this as a case study because I'm thinking about a business leader out there that needs to merge two companies together, or needs to divest of something, or is launching a new business line, or things that just generally mean change in an environment where the workforce is incredibly valuable. I mean, especially during that time. I mean, oh, hey, yeah, I'd love to wake up and apply for a job at a nursing home today during the middle of COVID. That's a great idea for me, So it's there's all these. I mean, I love what you're unpacking here, and I can see the through line between things like recognizing the 8 different ways that people consume information, and then but you must have had just enormous pressure on yourself just to get this message out and do well. I mean, this was a full court press, right?
Yes, it was. And it was, if you were watching the news at the time, it was life and death in many places. And a lot of nursing home residents were dying from COVID. So on top of having a really great team that does infection control, the cleanliness, the nursing care, and all those things, as we were educating our workforce as well, they were seeing that we were coming from a place of you must, you could, you should. In fact, those were words we were telling people not to use in part of the education. We will not be prescriptive. We will not be suggestive. That we really took a neutral stance and said, because it wasn't mandatory at that point. We took a neutral stance and said, make some decisions and figure it out. We also very intentionally, so it was to provide information, and there was no pressure per se. And then we also very intentionally took a stance of no bribes. There were some states at the time that were giving away cars or giant gift cards. I think I saw 1 or 2 models that gave away college tuition to encourage large groups to get vaccinated. But we felt that for a decision that important, if we were saying you're smart enough to make this decision, that it would cheapen the information that we were sharing to put money on it, because then it would become, why do you have to pay us if it's a good thing? If it's a good thing for me, why would you have to pay me to do that? So then that would generate mistrust.
There's just, I'm sorry, because I could listen to you all day because this is just fascinating, but I'm just sort of thinking about all of this in my mind. I'm just thinking about just your relationship with people and your workforce. I mean, I just keep hearing again and again, this is during a time where a lot of people would say, oh my gosh, first of all, why aren't you getting the vaccine, right? It's so important to my business. Don't you see? Then you have this tendency to get angry at people that just don't want to get the vaccine. And I'm just talking about what we've seen in other places, right? I mean, and then you fight tooth and nail, and people resort to bribes, and all of those different. I mean, how many staff members are we talking about?
It's about 200.
Okay, that's not a small amount of people. I mean, the average size of a business is under that. So again, it's something new. So let me ask another question, right? I mean, in business, there are things that you plan for. I'm going to merge. I'm going to have a new product. I'm going to divest, whatever it might be. And then there are just crises and surprises, right? Crisis communication. The founder passes away. Somebody, I don't know, a hostile takeover, asteroid hits the factory, something like that. Did you always have were you ready for this as a crisis? Were you ready for a pandemic? Was there a playbook that you kind of went to as this, or?
Well, I think having an extensive background working in nonprofits, we start with values. We start by listening. And when there's a decision to be made that impacts the residents, and it can be a complicated one, my first thought is, how are we serving the residents? How does this tie to our mission? How does what we have to do with the task at hand, whether it's COVID or mergers or emergency disasters, how do we fulfill our mission to serve our residents using our values? Because that is That's what keeps people in the boat rowing in the same direction together. And everybody has a different oarsman position in the boat, but we're all rowing in the same direction. And the direction is in fulfillment of the mission and service to the residents. What do we do? And how do we do it? What is the attitude? What are the values that impact our choices that we make with regards to that? And so I think when you start there, you can't go wrong. One of my predecessors that I went to school with, I named Mulaney, shout out there. She would always say, if you start with the resident, it can never go wrong.
Right.
So that in part is some of it. But when you ask if I've seen this before and I had a playbook, I've been around long enough to see AIDS. And back when AIDS was out, it's the same thing. It was a new illness that people didn't understand. Nurses were afraid to touch patients. And so I think I had the life experience to kind of go, okay, I've seen this before. People are afraid to touch, people are afraid to care because they're afraid, not on the scale that we saw COVID, but I had seen it on a smaller scale. If you studied public health, about Ebola, there are these illnesses do pop up around the world. It is part of biological evolution that sometimes something evolves that's not so friendly to the human species. And so it does happen. And I think when you've lived life enough and you work with emergency preparedness, one of the quirky things, you'd asked about quirky things about working in Washington, D.C., is that this is the home of the President of the United States. We are always prepared for disaster management in Washington, D.C. And I think we have a superb citywide healthcare emergency coordinated response network and system that practices, that communicates, that does drills, that does education on a regular basis. And so having that practice, perhaps that helps to go through. The other thing is, I've studied the GE change management process, which is rapid change while you're holding your organization together. So there are different models that can be borrowed, and the Baldrige Quality Awards, those come from cross industry. So there is the opportunity to look at cross events, right? Different sectors. You can look at emergency preparedness. You can look at mergers like we were talking about earlier, but borrowing those lessons, you can look at other illnesses that have happened. You can look at the lessons learned and sort of extrapolate what the gems, the nuggets out of those that we can take forward into COVID. Wow. Or the next system.
And the next system. And let's talk about the future a little bit. So now COVID has not ended for our industry. And you're still dealing with it, and also, we're in a business where, people do have changing wants and desires, and I think that the image of your types of services has been affected, obviously, by the mindset of COVID. Where do you see things going with Forest Hills? How are you preparing Forest Hills for the future?
When I think of the future, I think the biggest thing that is an opportunity and a challenge. The Chinese word for crisis is the same as opportunity. And when you look at that, is the shrinking workforce, not just in senior living, but everywhere, just because the aging demographics, the fact that we have to learn how to do more with less people. It's almost the opposite of after World War II, when people came home and we had the GI Bill and people got educated, and all of a sudden women were getting educated as well. We had a boom in the workforce. And so we had to find jobs. We found extra jobs. And women entered the workforce. And even in most recent years, you find greeters at Staples. You find, ways that we can involve people. We're almost going to have to start backing that down because of the aging, booming demographics of how do we do more with less people. And certainly technology will play a role, but innovation can be technology, but it can also be through small process changes. You can review your job descriptions and say, this is nice, this is must, this is extra. And, where do you cut if you have to make that cut in reality? We do have to figure out how to do more with less people. Robotics is certainly a people extender. Technology and computer software is a people extender. I was just talking to someone who has a product that does essentially the weight scale is embedded into the bed, and it can tell also when residents are turning over, so that you understand you don't have to go check every 2 hours to turn the resident, because electronically it knows that the resident's already self-turned. Things like that. We need more and more of that. And I think that's where the real opportunity is in creating those types of systems, as well as making the supports and systems to those who work and are the backbone of senior living, providing them more support, not just economically, socially, and the social determinants of their health, but also as a society. The way we value our school teachers, who sometimes don't make a whole lot more money than our frontline caregivers either, but they are revered because you're taking care of my baby. And we just don't have that same amount of reverence for our frontline workers in senior living as we do for school teachers. And I would love to see that more. Yeah. And so what are the changes that we can do to create that? Being Asian, when I was in Japan before the start of COVID, I went to go visit, and I had my little Google translator, and I went to go find a nursing home, and I said, I'm from America and I want to see how you guys do things. Will you give me a tour? And they said, oh yeah, sure. And they walked me around, and it was interesting on a number of fronts. This integrated model where staff are eating and living their daily life with the residents, as opposed to serving the residents. They really were living together, is the best way I could sum it up. The daycare residents were getting their rehab during the day, so they could go home, bathe during the day, so when they go home, the caregiver at home doesn't have to deal with it as much. But their ratio in Japan, where I visited, was 3-1 for a nursing home. We don't have that anywhere in America, because out there it's a reasonably paid job, and it's an honorable job to care for the elders. So I think the opportunity for us in the future is to be the tipping point, like we're having conversations today, when we talk about ageism, we can talk about recognizing, creating awareness around ageism. But then how do we actually create workable solutions and evidence-based solutions that we are going to make a change towards making it an honorable profession for all?
I just love that. I love the concept of an honorable profession, and I fully support you in getting there. And I tell you, we could have a much longer podcast on all the things you're saying, Tina. I mean, I've got a ton of questions here we didn't even get to ask, but yeah, we have to cut it off at some point. So, but we do like to ask our guests, though. We have 3 questions about aging that we like to ask all the guests on the show. Are you okay if I try these questions with you? Okay.
Sure.
All right, 3 questions about aging. The first one is, Tina, when you think about how you've aged, what do you think has changed about you or grown with you that you really like about yourself?
I think I like that I'm willing to take more risks than when I was younger. I like that I know my purpose. My purpose is to do good, create abundance, and have some fun along the way. If I die and somebody says that that's what Tina was about, I'd be very happy. And there's a comfort and a groundedness in understanding, what is my purpose? Why do I get up in the morning? Not just Tuesday, but every day of the week. And I like that I'm unashamed now to say I'm looking for a splash of fun along the way.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. And then, so that's actually question number 2 is, like, what has surprised you the most about you as you've aged?
I think, and I asked this is an interesting. I actually asked this of somebody else the other day, and he had the same answer, which is, it's very common that I don't feel, look, or act my age that I think just one generation ago people would think. So I think as we're aging, we're able to identify our stressors, address them, and there's more of a freedom now that, I can wear Barbie pink at my age. I don't have to be a teenager, and even my children have noticed, Grandma was older when she was your age. So it's not that I think it's that we don't have to act our age. We can be timeless in whatever way we want to be. And it's not chasing the fountain of youth. It's understanding who you are in your skin at that point.
Yeah. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love it. Love that sentiment. Okay. And then our third and final question for you is there someone that you've met or been in your life that has set a good example for you in aging, someone that has inspired you to age with abundance?
Yes. So one of my former directors in nursing, her name is Janice Johnson. When I first met her, I said, how is it that you always have this zest, this shine, this energy, this light that comes out of you all the time? And I sat down and had a one-on-one conversation with her. This was probably about 20 years ago. So I'm lucky that I got this lesson around then. And she shared with me a very dark part of her life. Her only child, her only son, committed suicide. And she had decided, without going into that whole story, that she could wallow in it, view herself as a failure, as a mom, grieve the rest of her life, her only child, and so forth. And then she dug deep and intentionally found the meaning in the experience. And it was able to give her purpose in life to choose to live an abundant life. And it is well known in the literature that the worst loss, the worst sense of loss we can all experience in life is the loss of a child. You're supposed to lose your parents. You might lose your partner. You might lose a friend. But to lose a child is unnatural because we're supposed to live longer than them. And I think to know that someone I know personally has experienced the worst grief and loss you can possibly experience in life, it's worse than someone who dies suddenly in a car accident, and be able to find the graciousness to go on, not to put it aside, but to find new space in one's heart and soul to be able to live abundantly is hugely inspiring. And it makes me realize on the worst of my days, someone can do better, and that's inspiring to me.
I think that's just amazing. And I'm trying not to get a little choked up here, but I would thank Tina, thank you so much. I'm so glad that we had you as a guest on the show. We know you're extremely busy, and to find this time and to share these sentiments and thoughts is just so gracious of you, and we thank you. I'm just full right now of sort of emotions about the whole thing, just especially given your last story. But thank you so much for giving your time to be a guest on the show, Tina.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Art of Aging, which is part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from United Church Homes. And we want to hear from you. What has changed about you that, as you've aged, that you like? What are your techniques to inspire your workforce? What are things that you might have gone through that have been challenging that you found courage and resilience? And please visit us at abundantagingpodcast.com, www.abundantagingpodcast.com. I also encourage you guys to check out the Ruth Frost Parker Center at www.unitedchurchhomes.org/Parker-Center. And then, Tina, if somebody wants more information on Forest Hills, yourself, where can they find that?
They can find us at foresthillsdc.org. They can also find me there, and I'm on LinkedIn as Tina Sandri, and happy to catch you as well. I'm at tsandri@foresthillsdc.life.
Awesome. Well, Tina, again, deep thanks for your time today. Thank you so much. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Art of Aging, and we will see you next time.